She had locked her heart away for decades, until a young cowboy rode into her life and shattered every wall she'd built. What happened next defied everything she thought she knew about love, age, and second chances. This is a story about desire that refuses to die, and a woman who discovered it's never too late to feel alive again. Stay until the end, because what she learns will change how you see love forever. Chapter 1. The Stranger. The August heat bore down on the Montgomery ranch like a physical weight, shimmering off the cracked earth in waves that made the horizon dance. Clara Montgomery stood on the porch of the main house, one weathered hand shading her eyes as she surveyed the property that had been in her family for 3 generations. At 52, she carried herself with the rigid dignity of a woman who had learned that vulnerability only led to disappointment. The ranch stretched out before her, 2,000 acres of stubborn grass, stubborn cattle, and stubborn memories. Her late husband Thomas had died 8 years ago, leaving her with this empire of dust and loneliness. Since then, she'd managed it alone, hiring seasonal hands when necessary but never letting anyone close enough to matter. Mrs. Montgomery? Clara turned to see Frank, her aging foreman, approaching with his characteristic limp. Behind him walked a younger man, tall, lean, with sun-darkened skin and shoulders that spoke of honest work. He couldn't have been more than 30, maybe younger. His hat was pulled low, but when he lifted his eyes to meet hers, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. A flutter of recognition, as if her body remembered something her mind had deliberately forgotten. "This here's Jake Thornton," Frank said. "He's looking for work. Came up from Texas. Says he's good with horses." Jake removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face that was handsome in that effortless, dangerous way that Clara had learned to distrust. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and respectful, "I heard you might need help with the Mustangs you've been trying to break." Clara's first instinct was to send him away. She didn't need complications, didn't need some young drifter disrupting the careful monotony she'd constructed. But the truth was she did need help. 3 wild horses had been proving impossible to tame, and her current hands were better suited to cattle than horsebreaking. "What makes you think you can handle them when my men can't?" she asked, her tone deliberately cool. Jake's lips curved into a slight smile. "Because I don't try to break them, ma'am. I try to understand them." Something in those words struck a chord Clara didn't want to acknowledge. She nodded curtly. "Fine. $30 a week, plus room and board in the bunkhouse. You start tomorrow at dawn." "I'll start now if you'll let me," Jake said, settling his hat back on his head. Clara watched him walk toward the corral with Frank, something uneasy stirring in her chest. She told herself it was nothing, just another hired hand, another temporary presence that would drift away like all the others. But that evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of copper and gold, Clara found herself walking to the corral. Jake was there, standing perfectly still near the fence, simply watching the 3 Mustangs. A black stallion, a paint mare, and a gray gelding. He wasn't trying to approach them, wasn't making sudden moves, just watching as if having a silent conversation. The black stallion, the most aggressive of the 3, took a few tentative steps toward Jake. Clara held her breath, but Jake didn't move, didn't react. After several long minutes, the horse came close enough to sniff Jake's extended hand. "How did you do that?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. Jake turned, and in the fading light, his eyes seemed to see right through her carefully constructed armor. "Fear recognizes fear, ma'am, and trust recognizes trust. The horse knows I'm not here to hurt him. And how does he know that? Because I'm not afraid of what he might do to me," Jake said softly. "Sometimes the only way to connect with something wild is to stop protecting yourself." Clara felt her breath catch. The words hung between them, loaded with more meaning than a simple conversation about horses should carry. She turned away quickly, suddenly desperate to escape those knowing eyes. "See that you're in the bunkhouse by 9, she said sharply. "We keep early hours here." As she walked back to the house, Clara could feel Jake's gaze on her back. That night, lying alone in the 2 big bed she'd once shared with Thomas, she couldn't shake the memory of those eyes. eyes that looked at her not with pity or dismissal, but with something far more dangerous, genuine interest. She told herself she was being foolish, that tomorrow she'd regain her composure and remember why she'd sworn off men, off vulnerability, off everything that made her feel like the girl she'd been 40 years ago. But deep in the darkness, as a hot wind rattled the windows, Clara Montgomery felt the first crack forming in walls she'd thought were impenetrable. And part of her, a part she tried to bury, was terrified by how good that crack felt. Chapter 2. The Thawing. 3 weeks passed, and Clara found herself inventing reasons to be near the corral. She told herself it was simple ranch management, keeping an eye on the new hire, ensuring he was worth the money she was paying him. But the truth, which she refused to acknowledge even in her private thoughts, was far more complicated. Jake Thornton had proven himself exceptional with the horses. The black stallion, which had thrown 2 experienced wranglers, now ate from Jake's hand. The paint mare followed him like a devoted dog. Even the skittish gray gelding had begun to calm under Jake's patient attention. But it wasn't just the horses that responded to him. Clara noticed how the other ranch hands sought Jake's opinion, how even Frank, who'd been skeptical of the young stranger, now deferred to him on matters of livestock. Jake worked from dawn until dusk without complaint, but there was nothing subservient about him. He treated Clara with respect, but never with that careful distance men usually showed around widows of a certain age. He looked at her, really looked at her. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unseasonably cool with dark clouds gathering on the horizon, when everything changed. Clara was in the stable checking on a pregnant mare when she heard Jake's voice. "Easy now, sweetheart. That's it. Nobody's going to hurt you." She found him in the tack room, cradling an injured barn cat. The animal must have been in a fight. Its ear was torn, blood matting the fur on its side. Most men would have just shooed it away or, worse, put it down. But Jake sat on an overturned bucket, gently cleaning the wounds with a tenderness that made Clara's throat tighten. "Didn't take you for a cat person," she said from the doorway. Jake glanced up, not startled. "I'm a living creature deserves kindness person," he replied. "This old girl's been keeping the mice out of your grain stores. Least I can do is help her when she needs it." Clara watched as he worked, his large, calloused hands impossibly gentle. "You're good at taking care of broken things," she observed. "Nothing's really broken," Jake said, his eyes meeting hers with that unsettling directness. "Just hurt. There's a difference. Broken means beyond repair. Hurt just means needing time and patience. Some things have been hurt so long they forget how to heal," Clara heard herself say, the words escaping before she could stop them. Jake set the cat down carefully, and it limped to a corner to rest. He stood, wiping his hands on his jeans, never breaking eye contact. Maybe they just need the right reason to try. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Clara should have left, should have retreated to the safe distance she'd maintained. Instead, she found herself frozen as Jake took a step closer. "Mrs. Montgomery." "Clara," she corrected, her voice barely a whisper. "When it's just us, you can call me Clara." His eyes darkened with something that made her stomach flip. "Clara," he repeated, and her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer and a promise. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you're the loneliest person I've ever met, and the strongest. I can't figure out which one makes me want to know you more." "You don't know anything about me?" Clara protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know you wake up at 4:30 every morning and stand on your porch for exactly 10 minutes before you start work," Jake said softly. "I know you touch your wedding ring whenever you're making a hard decision. I know you pretend not to notice when the hands are struggling, then quietly fix whatever problem they're having without embarrassing them. I know you haven't let yourself want anything in years because wanting means risking, and you've been hurt too many times to risk again." Clara felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since Thomas's funeral. "You need to stop," she said, but it came out as a plea rather than a command. "Stop what? Seeing you? I can't do that, Clara. You're all I see." The first raindrops began to fall, pattering on the stable roof. Clara knew she should walk away. knew this path led nowhere good. He was too young, too vital, too everything she'd convinced herself she no longer needed or deserved. "I'm 20 years older than you," she said desperately. "I'm beautiful," Jake finished. "Strong, fascinating, real in a way I've never encountered before." "I'm too old for you," Clara murmured. But even as she said it, Jake closed the distance between them. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with aching gentleness. "So let me be young again," he whispered against her lips. "Let me remind you what it feels like to be seen, to be wanted, to be alive." And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It was fire and hunger and years of loneliness burning away in an instant. Clara's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed that this was madness. His arms wrapped around her, strong and sure, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Montgomery let herself fall. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the rain was falling in earnest. Clara touched her lips, stunned by how alive they felt, how alive she felt. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "No," Jake said firmly. "This is the first honest thing either of us has done in a long time." Clara fled then, running through the rain to the main house, her heart pounding and her body remembering sensations she'd thought were buried forever. Behind her, Jake watched from the stable doorway, his expression patient and determined. That night, as lightning illuminated her bedroom and thunder shook the windows, Clara lay awake knowing everything had changed. The walls around her heart, so carefully constructed over decades of disappointment, had developed more than a crack. They were crumbling, and terrifyingly, she wasn't sure she wanted to stop them. Chapter 3. The Surrender. The aftermath of the kiss hung over the Montgomery ranch like the humid air before a storm. Oppressive, inevitable, charged with the promise of transformation. Clara threw herself into work with desperate intensity, rising even earlier, staying in the fields even later, as if physical exhaustion could somehow silence the riot of feelings Jake had awakened. It didn't work. She felt his presence constantly, even when he was nowhere near. When she closed her eyes, she felt his hands on her face, his lips on hers, the solid warmth of his body. Worse, she felt the crack in her armor widening, letting in light she'd tried to keep out for years. Jake, for his part, didn't push, but he didn't retreat either. He continued his work with the same quiet competence, but now there was a new element in his glances, a patient certainty that unsettled Clara more than any aggressive pursuit could have. 5 days after the kiss, Clara's carefully maintained distance shattered completely. It started with Old Buck, the ranch's most reliable horse, going lame in the north pasture. Clara was 3 miles from the house when it happened, and the sun was already setting, painting the grasslands in shades of amber and shadow. She managed to get Buck walking slowly back toward the barn, but it was clear they wouldn't make it before full dark. Jake found them halfway home, riding out on the paint mare who now followed him like a devoted companion. "Frank sent me," he said simply, swinging down from his horse. He saw Buck limping on the camera feed from the north fence. "I can manage," Clara said automatically, but her voice lacked its usual steel. She was tired, bone-deep tired of managing, of being strong, of pretending she didn't need anyone. Jake studied her in the fading light, then made a decision. He helped her onto the paint mare, then took Buck's reins and began the slow walk back to the ranch. Clara could have protested, could have insisted on walking, but she didn't. For once, she let someone else carry the burden. They walked in silence as the stars emerged, one by one, in the vast Texas sky. The night air cooled, carrying the scent of sage and mesquite. Clara found herself studying Jake's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hat sat low on his head, the easy grace of his movements even while walking an injured horse. "Why are you really here, Jake?" she asked suddenly. "Young man like you could get work anywhere. Why a remote ranch in the middle of nowhere?" Jake was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost lost in the evening breeze. "Because I was running," he admitted. From expectations. From a future that was already planned out. From becoming someone I didn't want to be. He glanced up at her. I came here looking for space to figure out who I actually am. Instead, I found you. I'm not what you're looking for, Clara said. But it sounded hollow even to her own ears. Aren't you? Clara, I've spent my whole life around people who pretend. Who put on masks and play roles and never show what they really feel. But you, even when you're trying to push me away, you're more real than anyone I've ever met. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How magnetic? Clara felt tears prickling behind her eyes. You don't understand what you're asking for. I'm not some adventure, some romantic notion. I'm complicated and damaged and set in my ways. I've got decades of scars you can't even imagine. Show me, Jake said simply. What? He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the starlight, his eyes were dark and infinite. Show me your scars, your complications, your damage. I'm not afraid of any of it, Clara. I'm only afraid you'll never let me close enough to see the real you. Something inside Clara broke then. Not shattered, but opened, like a dam finally giving way to a river that had been held back too long. She slid down from the horse, her movements slow, deliberate. When her feet touched the ground, she was standing close enough to feel Jake's breath. I was married at 19, she heard herself say, to a man I thought would give me the world. He gave me bruises instead. When I finally got the courage to leave him, I was 22 and convinced I'd never trust my judgment about men again. Thomas was different, patient, kind, steady. I learned to love him, even if it wasn't the passionate, all-consuming kind of love I dreamed about as a girl. He died in a riding accident, and I realized I'd spent 30 years building a life with someone I loved but was never in love with. And now I'm 52, Jake. 52. With gray in my hair and lines on my face and a heart that I thought had forgotten how to race. Until you. Jake's hand came up slowly, cupping her face with infinite tenderness. I'm 31 years old, he said quietly, and I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you. Not the young girls who giggled and flirted. Not the women my own age who wanted me to be something I wasn't. You look at me like I'm real, like my thoughts matter. Like I'm more than just a pretty face or strong hands. Do you know how intoxicating that is? This can't work, Clara whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. People will talk. They'll say terrible things about both of us. Let them, Jake said fiercely. Clara, I don't care about people who are too small-minded to understand that connection doesn't follow a timeline. That desire doesn't check birth certificates. Care about you. About this. He placed her hand over his heart, and she could feel it racing. This doesn't lie. It doesn't calculate. It just knows what it wants. And I want you, all of you, the strength and the scars, the walls and what's behind them, everything. Clara made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need. Then let's figure it out together, Jake murmured, lowering his forehead to rest against hers. Let's be messy and uncertain and real. Let's stop running from the only thing that's made either of us feel truly alive. When he kissed her this time, Clara didn't just allow it. She claimed it. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, pouring years of loneliness and hunger into the connection. Jake responded with equal intensity, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground as if she weighed nothing. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Clara rested her head against his chest and felt his heartbeat thundering against her cheek. Above them, the Texas sky spread out infinite and star-filled, witnessing the surrender of a woman who'd thought she was done with wanting. Take me home, Clara whispered against his shirt, and don't let me go. Jake pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his voice rough with emotion. Never. I promise you, Clara Montgomery, never. They made their way back to the ranch slowly, hands intertwined, two souls who'd found each other against all logic and all odds. And for the first time in decades, Clara felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. The kind of hope that makes you young again, no matter what the calendar says. Chapter 4. The Awakening. The next 3 weeks transformed Clara Montgomery in ways she couldn't have imagined. In quiet moments stolen between ranch work, Jake taught her what it meant to be truly seen, truly wanted, truly alive. They met in the horse barn after the hands had gone to sleep, talking until early hours. Jake shared stories about his childhood, about a father who valued toughness over tenderness. Clara revealed dreams she'd abandoned, the paintings she used to create, the poetry she still wrote in a hidden journal. "Read me something?" Jake asked one night in the barn loft. Clara hesitated, then retrieved her journal. In the lamplight, her voice soft, she read a poem about feeling old until someone reminded her that age wasn't about years, but about daring to feel without defending, to want without pretending. When she finished, Jake stared at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "You're extraordinary," he whispered. "How did you hide this part of yourself for so long?" "Because no one ever asked to see it," Clara answered honestly. But reality soon intruded. The ranch hands noticed. Clara overheard whispers, saw sidelong glances. One evening, she heard a young hand named Tommy make crude comments about lonely widows and young studs, followed by rough laughter. The old shame crept back in. That night, she didn't go to the barn. Jake found her on the porch at midnight, sitting in darkness. "Talk to me," he said softly. "They're saying terrible things," Clara admitted, her voice breaking. "About both of us." "And what are you?" Jake asked gently. "A middle-aged woman making a fool of herself," Clara whispered. Jake knelt before her, taking both her hands. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice intense. "What we have isn't fantasy. It's two people who found each other when neither was looking. Two people who see each other and choose to be brave enough to try. That's not foolishness, Clara. That's courage. But the age difference is a number," Jake interrupted. "You know what matters? How I feel when you laugh. How safe I feel telling you my fears. How alive I feel when I'm with you. That's real. Everything else is noise." Clara felt tears spilling. "I'm so afraid this will end. That you'll realize you could have someone younger easier." Jake wiped her tears, his touch achingly gentle. "I don't want easier. I want you, exactly as you are. With your strength and your wounds and your extraordinary heart. Today, tomorrow, and every day you'll have me." Something fundamental shifted in Clara. She pulled Jake close and kissed him, pouring everything into the connection. Gratitude, desire, hope, and something dangerously like love. The following morning, Clara made a decision. At breakfast, with all the ranch hands assembled, she stood and spoke clearly. "I know there's been talk about Jake and me. I want to be clear. What's between us is nobody's business. But I won't hide it either. Life's too short and I've wasted too much caring what people think. Anyone who has a problem can collect their wages and leave. Anyone who wants to stay and do the work they were hired for, with respect, is welcome." The room was silent. Then Frank nodded slowly. "Fair enough, boss." One by one, the others nodded. Tommy had the grace to look ashamed. Jake caught Clara's eye and smiled. A smile so full of pride that it made her chest tighten. That afternoon, as they worked with the last Mustang, Clara realized something profound. She wasn't becoming young again. She was becoming whole. Learning that parts of herself she'd buried weren't dead, just sleeping. "What are you thinking?" Jake asked as they watched the black stallion run freely. "That maybe I had it wrong when I told you I was too old for you," Clara said softly. Jake's hand found hers. "Oh, age isn't about years lived. It's about years truly living. I stopped living long ago. You didn't make me young again, Jake. You reminded me how to live." Jake turned her to face him, his hands framing her face. "You did the same for me. Taught me that real connection requires courage. That love sees the whole person and chooses them anyway." "Love," Clara breathed. "Yes, I love you, Clara Montgomery. The way you think. The way you lead. The way you're brave even when you're terrified. I love all of you." Clara felt the final barrier fall. "I love you too," she whispered. As the sun descended, painting the Texas sky in fire and gold, they stood together, Two people who'd found each other across age and expectations and fear. Who'd proven that choosing joy when the world says you've run out of time is the most radical act of all. Later, as stars emerged, Clara stood on her porch with Jake's arms wrapped around her. "No regrets," he murmured. Clara smiled, covering his hands with hers. "Only that I wasted so many years believing I was done with wanting. Done with love." "You're not done," Jake said firmly. "You're just beginning." Standing under the vast Texas sky, Clara Montgomery believed him. Because young isn't a number, it's a choice. The choice to stay open, to keep feeling, to keep believing tomorrow might hold something wonderful. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara was excited to find out what that something might be.